Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on setting up your payroll for Sage Business Cloud Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm one of the trainers here at Sage. I'll be taking you through this session which will last approximately 1 hour, and I am joined by colleagues behind the scenes who are on hand to answer any questions that you might have. So before we get going, I'll just run through a quick bit of housekeeping with you all. First of all, if you do have a microphone, please note that it is muted automatically throughout the webinar today. However, if you do have any questions, you can send them through by clicking on the question mark icon on the right-hand side of your screen. That'll open up our Q&A panel. So you just type your question in and send it through, and we will then respond to that question, usually with another typed response. We have handouts available. If you'd like to download a copy of the slides or some useful links, head over to the documents icon on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you did want to see us in full screen, you've got an option to switch to full screen using the control at the bottom of that control panel. So we're now going to run through what we're going to cover in the webinar today. So I'll start with an introduction, just running through very briefly some of the key features of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. We're then going to demo how to access the software from your browser, and we're going to show you around how to find all of the main areas. And then I'm going to work through a checklist of the information that you'll need to get started, and hopefully get you to the point where you're ready to run your first payroll at the end of this session. So in terms of setting up the payroll, we're going to look at some different options, how you would set up for a new payroll, taking on your first employee. We're going to take a look at moving to Sage Payroll, either manually by entering all the details one by one, or by importing your employees from an FPS. We're going to run through the pension setup and also some additional setup steps, for example, setting up employment allowance. And then we should have about 5 minutes at the end to take any final questions, so do stick around if you would like to join in with that. If you have already set up your software, we do have other webinars explaining how to process a payroll. Or if you're coming over from Sage Instant Payroll, we do have a session specifically on that migration process. So if you're interested in those other webinars, head to our website. The link is on this slide and also in our handouts, and then you can either sign up or you can watch the on-demand version. So let's get straight on to our introduction, where I'm going to run through some key features of Sage Payroll. So Business Cloud Payroll is cloud-based, as the name suggests, which is great news. There are no more installs that you need to worry about at payroll year end or at any other time. The latest features improvements will be available at the point you sign in. This also means you can access your software anywhere from any internet connected device. So not only your PC or laptop, that could be a tablet as well, or even from your mobile phone. There's an option to host payslips online in the employee portal, or alternatively, you can email or print out the payslips. We have auto enrollment and pensions features, ensuring that any employee that meets the criteria to be auto enrolled will be put into your pension scheme. And you can also exchange data with supported providers directly if you're with Nest or Smart Pensions. The software integrates with Sage Business Cloud Accounting, so you can post your payroll information seamlessly into your accounts that way. You have the option of setting up additional users should you need any cover when you're on holiday, or if you've got a payroll team where more than one of you needs to access the payroll. And we have plenty of help and support available 24/7 via our website, our telephone support line, and various other contact us options. And we'll run through some of that help and support towards the end of the webinar. The other thing to mention is that you're in complete control of your subscription with Sage Business Cloud. In the software, if you go to Manage Business Account and then head to Subscription and Invoices, you have the option of changing your subscription to suit your business needs. In other words, you can increase or decrease the number of employees so that you're only paying for what you actually need at that time. Full steps on how to do that is available in our Help Center. Again, the link is on that slide. So I want to give you a quick look around the software and remind you how to access Sage Business Cloud Payroll. So it's really simple to do. Open your preferred browser and head to sage.com. And then if you click the login option, which you find in the top right-hand side of the screen, you then just need to click Sage Business Cloud, Accounting and Payroll. And then from that point, enter your email address and password, and then you are logged in to the software. So we're going to take a look at it in a bit more detail. I'm going to give you a tour of Sage Payroll. This is a payroll that I've already set up. So this is the point that we're going to get you to following the steps in today's webinar. We are currently looking at the payroll summary, which will highlight your next pay run for the various pay frequencies that you operate. You'll see information about RTI, or real-time information, and your pension submissions. And actually there's a pop-up here about setting up online pay slips and P60s. So do check that out if that's an option you want to go for. The rest of the information is then neatly organized into these tabs at the top of the screen. So the pay runs tab gives details of any completed pay runs that you've run here on the right-hand side, which you can go back into and view, and also your next pay runs that are ready to be processed. You'll see an employee list from the Employees tab. This is where you would set up any new starters, also view or amend any employee information. You have the pensions area where you set up your pension scheme or schemes if you have more than one. And you have reports where you can view pension contributions and auto enrolment statuses. We have the year-end option, which will have all of your year-end tasks at the end of each tax year. That's the 5th of April, including the P60 option, which you'll see nearer the time, and also a drop-down so you can look back at previous tax years that you've completed in Sage Payroll. You have a number of useful reports that you can run after completing a pay run, showing you things like a payslip summary, or down here we have average earnings and working hours. And then we have the settings area. A lot of these we're going to look at today as part of the setup process, but these can be accessed at any time from the settings tab. And we also have plenty of help available in the software. You may have noticed these question mark icons dotted around the various areas, which will take you directly to the help page for that relevant area. So this will take us to the settings help page, or at any time you can click the help option here at the top of the screen, which will take you to the home page of our help center. And then you can either search for the topic that you're interested in, or you can use these menus here on the left-hand side, where you can find the article with the information that you need. If you need further support from our help center, just scroll to the bottom of the screen and look for the Get in Touch link, highlighted just here. And that'll show you the various ways you can get in touch, including online chat, chatting to a Sage ambassador, day or night, telephone helpline, and sending us an email. So all of that help is available really easily, either via the question mark icon or the help option there at the top. So that is how you access Business Cloud Payroll. And what we're going to do now is take you through a checklist of the information that you'll need before we go ahead and demo those setup processes for you. So this is the type of information you'll need when you come to set up Sage Payroll. It's slightly different information depending on whether you're a new company taking on employees for the first time, or you're an existing payroll, either moving at the start of the tax year or more commonly mid-tax year. So in terms of employer details, you'll need some references, a PAYE reference and accounts office reference, and you'll also need the user ID and password that you use to log into PAYE online services. You'll need to know your reporting frequency, which is usually monthly, and payment method when you're making payments to HMRC. And if you are moving across mid-tax year, we do strongly recommend that you complete the full P32 reporting period in your old software. So all payrolls up to the 5th of the month before you move over. And you'll need to know how much employment allowance you've claimed, if applicable, in the tax year so far. In terms of employees, you'll need their personal details. So names, addresses, date of birth, gender, and national insurance number. If you're a brand new business taking on a new employee, you'll need either their P45 or a starter checklist, also known as a P46. And for those existing payrolls, if you're moving over mid-tax year, you'll need the year-to-date values for pay, tax, and national insurance, which you can get from P11 reports. And you'll also need your RTI Pay ID from your previous software where available. And that can then be reused when you're setting up in Sage. For pension details, you'll need pension provider information, including any references, groups, or payment sources. You'll need to know contribution details for employee and employer, the calculation basis, whether that's qualifying earnings or specific elements of pay, and how the tax relief works. And if you're an existing business, what your staging or duty start date was. So loads of information there. You can download the slides if you want a copy of that checklist, and you'll see how we use this information to get everything set up as we run through the rest of the demos. So that's what we're going to get on to now, setting up Sage Business Cloud Payroll. I've put together the 4 key tasks, and these are tasks that you would complete regardless of whether you're a brand new payroll or an existing payroll. So you'll need to enter employer details. You'll need to set up a payday calendar for your various pay frequencies. You'll need to enter employee details or import them from a file, and you'll need to set up your pensions. Now, if you are an existing payroll moving across mid-tax year, you'll also need to provide some opening balances. So this would be the employee year-to-date information from their P11, and also some employer details if you've reclaimed any statutory payments or you're claiming employment allowance in the current tax year. And you find all of that on your P32 reports. So let's get started with employer details. You're prompted to enter these at the point you first add payroll to your subscription. However, if you want to check them, or if you didn't enter them at the time, you just go to the Settings tab and then click onto Payroll Settings. And from there, you can confirm your PAYE reference, Accounts Office reference, and also indicate your reporting frequency and pay method. So nice and simple to check or enter that information. One of your first tasks, they're done from the settings. So assuming that information is entered, we then have some wizards that you can use to actually set up your software. So this Welcome to Payroll screen is what you would see on the Summary tab before you've set anything up. It gives you 3 options to set up your payroll. So the first one is to manually migrate an existing payroll, and you would choose that option if you want to manually enter your employee details and opening balances partway through a tax year. The second is to import employees. So if you have an FPS file from your previous software, you can use that to import employee details and year-to-date values. And the third one is new company, which you would use if you're taking on your very first employee as a new business, or if you're migrating an existing payroll, but you're doing this at the start of a tax year, because you won't need to enter any opening balances at that point, as you'll be starting from 0 balances as at the 6th of April. So we're going to take a look through each of these options. We've got a few videos to show you and also a live demo. So let's begin with the simplest option, setting up a new payroll. And we're going to focus mainly on the pay calendar and the employee details in this section. So this is the option you choose if you're taking on your first employee or you're migrating a payroll at the start of a tax year. And you would enter employee details manually with no opening balances required. So I have a short video, it's just under 5 minutes to show you of this process, and then I'll be back to recap before we move on to setting up existing payrolls. In this demo, I'll show you how to set up your payroll if you're a new company taking on your first employee. Starting from the Summary tab, click New Company. You now have 2 steps to complete. You'll need to set up employee paydays and then add your employees to payroll. To set up the paydays, click the link. This opens the payday calendar settings, where you can set up weekly, monthly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly calendars. For this demo, we'll set up a monthly calendar. You'll need to choose the day of the month that you pay your employees, which can either be the same day each month or the last day of the month. We'll choose the same day of the month, in this case the 25th, and then confirm our first pay run, which will be October. We can also choose to avoid public holidays and weekends, so if the 25th falls on a weekend or bank holiday, payroll will use the previous working day as the pay date. To save the calendar, click Save. If you need to make changes, go to Manage Frequency, then click Edit Paydays. Or to delete the calendar, click Remove Frequency. You can set up weekly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly calendars in the same way, choosing a day of the week as your pay date and then confirming the date of your first pay run. When you've finished, to check your upcoming pay dates, click View Pay Calendar. The payday calendar is now set up, but if you need to get back to this screen, you can go to Settings and then Payday Settings. We'll return to the summary and go back to New Company. We're now ready to add our employees to payroll. Click the link to add your employees. Then to enter your employees' details, click Create Employee. We'll start with the employee's personal details and contact details. Make sure that you enter their full name, correct date of birth and national insurance number, and provide at least 2 address lines. Scroll down, then enter employment details, including pay cycle, start date and payment method, and directorship details if they're a director. In previous tax details, choose the starting basis. There are options for existing employees, or for new employees with either a P45 or a P46, also known as a starter checklist. In this demo, we're taking on a new employee, and as we don't have their P45, we'll choose P46. We can then choose the circumstances from the declaration on their starter checklist. There's an explanation of each declaration shown on the right. Choose the relevant national insurance category. And once all the information's entered, click Save to create your first employee record. You'd then repeat these steps for any other employees you need to add to your payroll. Once you've set up your employees, you can return to the summary. Here you can see your payroll summary, confirming the next pay run and HMRC submissions. You can also enter your auto-enrolment and pension details and record your employment allowance claim before you process your first pay run. So that was a video that I recorded a few weeks ago now, explaining how to set up a new payroll company, focusing on the 2 main tasks there. So the first was setting up a payday calendar, which is as simple as choosing the pay frequency, weekly, monthly, 2-weekly or 4-weekly, and then confirming the day of the week or month that your employees are paid. This setting can be overridden at the point you run a payroll. So if it's not the same day each month, for example, and you want the flexibility to be able to change that, you can absolutely do that at the start of each pay run. But you will need a calendar in place with some kind of default pay dates. So you will need to complete this step to move on, and you can view the pay calendar to see upcoming pay dates for the current tax year. The other task was to create the employee records, entering all their personal and contact details, employment and directorship details where applicable. And at the bottom of that screen, for a new starter, you would either enter P45 or P46 details. And there's also a section which we didn't really cover in the video about pay document preferences. So if you're not using the online payslips feature, you can either email or print payslips for your employees. So you would indicate what option you want to use, and if it is email, you can enter an email address and a password, which will keep that payslip secure. So we started with that scenario because it's the simplest one and also gives you a good look at payday calendars and employee details. For the rest of the webinar, though, we're going to focus on moving an existing payroll to Sage. And you actually have two options when it comes to doing this. You can either manually migrate, which is what we're going to cover first, or you can import existing employees from an FPS file from your existing software. And I've got a demo for that coming up a little bit later. But let's start with the manual option. So manually migrate is what you would choose if you're moving from another payroll provider partway through a tax year. And it is where you will enter both employee details and opening balances manually. So you'll need all those details. You'll need P11 reports. And I have another quick demo video for you, another 5-minute video, which will show you that process in a little bit more detail. So I'll be back with you in another 5 minutes. In this demo, I'll show you how to set up your payroll if you're moving from another provider and want to enter the details manually. Starting from the Summary tab, choose the Manually Migrate option. This takes you to the Add Payroll Data screen, where there are 3 steps to complete. You'll need to set up a calendar, set up your employees, and then confirm the details. In the first step, you'll need to confirm your P32 reporting frequency and payment method, and the last completed reporting period from your previous payroll software. For this demo, we're moving to Sage Payroll in October, so we'll choose month 6 as the last completed reporting period. You can then set up your payday calendar. In this example, we have monthly paid employees, paid on the 25th day of the month, and will avoid public holidays and weekends. To set up your employees, click Next, and then click Add Employee. Enter the employee's name and their personal details and contact details. You can then enter their tax details. Make sure you enter the original start date and the tax code, NI category, and RTI Pay ID from your previous payroll software. As they've been paid in the current tax year, we'll also need to enter opening balances. This includes taxable pay, tax paid, and national insurance details. You can get this information from P11 or similar reports in your previous payroll software. We'll select Paid this tax year, and then enter the PAYE details and NIC details. When you've done this, scroll down and, if required, enter directorship details, statutory payments such as maternity, adoption or paternity pay, and student loan repayments. If the employee started employment with you in the current tax year, you'll also need to enter their P45 or P46 details. When you've finished, just click Save. You can then repeat this for any other employees you need to set up. It's important to note that to save the details you've entered, you must complete the confirmation step. If you navigate away from this screen, you'll lose any information you've entered so far. So to save the employee I've just set up, I'll click Next. Then to confirm the details, click Submit. You'll then see the next steps, which include entering any statutory pay recovery and employment allowance values, confirming your employee's working patterns, entering current absences, and setting up student loan deductions. You can click the links in each step to go to the relevant area in Payroll. For now, I'll click Done, which takes us back to the payroll summary. To add further employees or to review the information you've entered, click the link to review, edit, or further configure your migrated data. Then click Review or Edit your migrated data, which takes you back to the Add Payroll Data screen. When you've finished, you can go back to the payroll summary to check your next pay run and HMRC submissions. You can also enter your auto-enrolment and pension details and record your employment allowance claim before you process your first pay run. Right, so that was another pre-recorded demo of manually migrating a payroll. And the top tip there is if you're in the middle of this process and you've started to add employee details, don't navigate away from that screen. Make sure you confirm and complete the final step, as you will lose any information you've entered if you were just to click away in the middle of that process. So what I did want to do before we move on to importing the employee details was to give you a closer look at some of the reports that were mentioned in that video. So starting with the P11 reports, this gives you details of the PAYE and national insurance information, including any statutory payments recovered as well. So you can run these reports in your previous software or something very similar. And using the totals, you would be able to fill in the relevant fields on the opening balances. And when it comes to employer details, if you've reclaimed any statutory payments in the tax year to date, you'll need to enter statutory pay recovered, which you'll find on your P32 report. And for employment allowance, if you're claiming that, if you're eligible for it, you'll need to enter the amount of allowance used, again, on the P32 report, which I will show you as part of the next demo. So that's a manual process, probably great for relatively small payrolls where you've got the time to enter the details, but you could save time, maybe increase accuracy by importing your employee details. This is possible if you have an FPS file from your previous software, and you can do this at any time in the tax year. So if it's mid-tax year, you would include year-to-date values, but there's also an option at the start of a tax year just to import the employee details if you don't need opening balances. So I'm going to take you through this process in a live demo. So let's just get rid of them slides and bring up a payroll that I have just started. So what I've done so far, if I take you into the settings, is I've entered my payroll settings. So I've put in a PAYE reference, an accounts office reference, report and frequency, and pay method. But then from the summary, I'm going to use this import employees option to create my employee records and opening balances from my latest FPS file in my previous software. So if I go ahead and click on import employees, there's a bit of information about how you're going to do this, what an FPS file is. We have some guidance on where to find an FPS file if you're using Sage desktop software, for example, or other payroll providers. And there is a recommendation at the bottom that you complete this process at the end of a P32 reporting period so that you've got full reporting periods available in your new software and you're not starting midway through a tax month. So I've read that information. I'm going to click on to next. The next thing I need to do is to browse to my FPS file. So I'll click on that link Have a look at my desktop where I saved it. Here's my FPS file. It's been validated, so it's checked that the employer references within that file match what I've set up in my payroll. So if I click onto next, it's then going to preview the employees that were in that FPS file, and by default, all of those employees will be selected for import. Now, this list would not include any leavers unless the person had left in the previous pay period. And you don't have to import your leavers if they're not going to be paid by you again. So you do have the option of deselecting any recent leavers from this file, or those that left in a previous period won't be in the FPS in the first place, but that will not be a problem. So you can see we've got the details of each employee. This is the checkbox that you would use at the start of a tax year if you only want to bring in personal details, because you're going to be starting in period 1. But because we're moving across, we're going to start using Sage in December. I'm not going to select that box because I need to bring in the year-to-date values from my month 8 FPS. So I'm just going to click confirm and then complete import. And you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it confirms I've successfully imported the employees. We now have a checklist to run through. I'm going to take you through the main steps in the demo. And it does mention at the bottom, if you need to import another FPS, you can begin the import process again. And you might need to do this if you have multiple pay frequencies. So maybe you've brought in your monthly employees and next you want to import your weeklies. So let's just get through some of the steps in the checklist. You have links to the relevant areas in Sage Payroll on each of these steps. And the first thing to do is to set up the pay days. So if I click on that link, it takes me into the payday calendar settings. I'm just going to quickly set up a monthly pay calendar where the pay date is the same day each month. And our first pay run in Sage is going to be December. So we're going to avoid public holidays and weekends. I'll just click save. That's the new calendar set up. And if I head back to the summary, you can see that it's now taken us into a payroll summary. So it straight away tells us what our next pay date will be. And we can pick up the checklist in this section here on the right-hand side, tick in the box to confirm that we have now set up our pay days. So the next task here is to update the employee records. So we can add any additional information that we might need. We can check opening balances. We can also confirm working patterns. And while we're there, you can see there's a little warning here on the left-hand side. We do have some employees that require attention. So there is a bit of information that we're going to need to add to the records. So if I click on this link, update their employee records, you can see both of these employees have an RTI issue. If I select employee 1, it tells me that the start date is required. So all I now need to do is to click edit, and then down here, I can actually fill in this employee's original start date, 1st of January 2020. And while I'm here, I'm just going to fill in the address details, as these have not been imported from that FPS file. So it doesn't bring everything over. It does bring in most of the information you will need. Just at the bottom of this section, if you are setting up an employee that you took on recently that has worked for another employer during the tax year, you will need to fill in either their P45 or P46 details. But actually, this is an existing employee who's worked with us since January 2020, so nothing for us to enter there. While we're here, we may as well show you the opening balances. And these have been imported from the FPS file. So PAYE and NIC details, got some pension details here, and also the statutory paternity pay for this employee. So they also have a statutory payment. And the working pattern. So we'll just need to save the employee start date. And if we needed to, if they don't work a standard Monday to Friday week, we can edit the working pattern. We can indicate their actual working days right here. So you would work through each of the employees. I'll just fix this other start date issue. And I'll go ahead and save that second employee. And then to return to the checklist, just go back to the summary tab. And we can either tick these off individually, or we can tick the main box to say that the employee records have been checked and updated. A couple of other tasks I'll show you now. We're going to come back to pensions because we're going to cover that later on in the webinar. If there's been any statutory pay recovery or compensation, you'll see this checklist item. And this actually takes us to the Migrate Employer Statutory Payment Value screen. This is where your P32 will come in useful. So this is what a P32 looks like. I've run it for month 1 to 8 in my previous software. So it showed me how much SPP I've recovered and the NI compensation on that. Means I can easily fill this in with the same values. And then click Save. And while we're in the payroll settings, as well as the statutory pay values, we have employment allowance values that we're migrating. So I'm saying, yes, we applied for the allowance. It wasn't mid-year. We started claiming it at the start of the year. And actually, in this case, we have claimed £4,000 of employment allowance. So we've claimed it all, but we're recording that in the new software so that it knows that we're eligible, but there's nothing more that we need to claim. So that has been saved. I'll head back to the summary, and then I can tick these boxes to say that we've completed migrating the employer values. So we'll take a quick pause at that point and recap some of those steps for you. So we chose the import option that time to import details from our FPS. Once we browse to the FPS file and confirm the import, we had the checklist to work through. So this is where we set up the payday calendar. We've checked the employee details, entered additional information where needed, so start dates and addresses being fairly common, P45 details perhaps for employees that have only started recently. And then we completed the steps to migrate employer values. And the final steps, which we're going to cover next, is to set up and assign your pension scheme. And more information about importing an FPS is available in our Help Centre following the link on that slide. Right, so next up we have auto enrolment and pensions. The way that you set this up differs for an existing payroll compared to a brand new payroll. We're going to stick with the existing payroll theme in the demo, but I will kind of mention how those steps are different for a new payroll. So I'm going to give you a demo on setting this up first, and then again we'll recap the steps once we have done just that. So if you're working through a checklist because you've done an import, you can follow these links. If not, you can always click Set Up Pensions from the summary, or you can go directly to the Pensions tab. And the first thing you'll need to do is to confirm your staging or duty start date, which would either be the staging date you were given by the pensions regulator, or if you're a more recent employer, it will have been the date that you took on your first employee. So in this example, our duty start date was the 1st of January 2020. That's when this business took on their first employee. And we've already been doing auto enrolment. It is already set up. So we're choosing this first option. So if I click on to save, it then tells us that the pension is ready to be set up. And we then have an option where we can add our new pension. So there is a question, do you have an existing pension scheme? In most cases, if you're moving a payroll across, you will have one. If you didn't, or you wanted a new scheme, you've got links to some of the providers here that will help you set up a scheme for your business. But we're going to say, yes, we already have one, and I'm going to click on to add a new pension. If you're with one of the providers named here, you would click on the relevant link, or if not, you would click on the link to add your own pension. I'm going to go with Nest in this example. And what I can then do is I can fill in my Nest employer reference, and then I can set up my groups and sources. So the group and source names do need to exactly match the way they have been set up on the Nest online portal. So be careful about cases and spaces. So make sure it's the same case and it's exactly the same as how it was set up. I'm going to create group 1 here, and it's working out the pension as a percentage. The employer is contributing 3%, the employee is contributing 5%, but the earnings basis in this case is actually qualifying earnings, or banded earnings, as it's sometimes known, meaning that all payments between the lower and upper threshold of qualifying earnings will be used to calculate pension, but it won't be all of that pay, it's just the ones between the thresholds. You've then got the tax relief setting. So some schemes are deducted before tax, known as a net pay arrangement. Other schemes are deducted after tax, known as a relief at source arrangement. This Nest scheme is after tax, so I have not ticked the box, but I have set the payment due date for pension payments to the provider, and I've ticked the box saying I want this to be our default plan. So I'm going to add that Nest group. If I had any more, I could add those in addition. I'm also going to set up my payment source just by entering the source name. And again, this must exactly match whatever you named your source on the Nest portal. And then to complete the setup, I would tick the box to agree to the terms, and I would then click Save. So we can then indicate that our pension scheme qualifies. And if I click back on the Pensions tab, there's the scheme that I've set up. We can edit it if we need to, and we can add further pension schemes if that is something we need to do as well. So if you're working through the checklist, you can come back at this point and tick the box to say you've set up your employer pensions. But what you then need to do for an existing payroll is to assign your employees to that pension plan. You could follow this link, which will actually take you to the employees area. What you then need to do for each employee is head to the Workplace Pensions tab, click the Edit option at the top, and then fill in the details right here. So the status explains how they got into the pension scheme in the first place. So were they enrolled, or maybe they had joined before auto-enrollment. There's also other statuses. Perhaps they opted out of the pension or they ceased membership. So you would choose the appropriate status here. And actually you get a list of the status definitions should you need them. And you can also fill in when that happened. So this employee was enrolled on the 1st of January on his start date with this company. You've then got the pension scheme. I've only got the one set up, so Nest Corporation, and I've chosen the plan and the source. And all I then need to do is to hit save. And I can then repeat that step for my other employees. So employee 2 in this case was also auto-enrolled, also on the 1st of January, and they're all in the same scheme. I have got a pension data issue requiring attention. I think that's the missing address details, so I will need to go in and fill that in as well. I won't do that for the demo today just to save some time, but I'll come back to this checklist and we will tick off there the final step. So let's give you a bit of recap on that. Auto enrollment and pensions. So for an existing payroll, first step was to enter your staging or duty start date. You then added the pension details. And then we needed to assign the employees to the pension, set in their status and the date they joined, for example. The way that that's different for a new company is that you would still enter a duty start date, which will be the date you took on your first employee, but you then work through a pensions checklist. So it reminds you to do things like nominate a contact with the pensions regulator, tells you about assessing your workforce and communicating auto-enrolment information to your employees. And as part of that checklist, yes, you do have the step to add the pension scheme. So this is where you work through the various settings, either choosing your pension provider or adding your own pension. Groups and sources is what's needed for Nest, slightly different requirements for other providers. And then the settings that control the deductions and how they're calculated is in the group or the plan. So ours were percentages. We're using the kind of default minimum percentages, and in this case it applied to qualifying earnings, and then you've got your tax relief setting before or after tax. If you're unsure, by the way, on any of these details, do speak to your pension provider for clarification. Right, so we've got just over 10 minutes left in the webinar. I've got a few additional setup steps that I will take you through. And a quick reminder, if you have questions, you can submit them through to us using the Q&A option on the right-hand side of your screen. So for additional setup, the first thing I'm going to cover is employment allowance. So many smaller businesses are eligible to claim employment allowance from the government, and it allows you to claim up to £4,000 per tax year by reducing your employer national insurance contributions when recording payments to HMRC. So if you're eligible, you are required to submit a claim for each tax year, and you usually do that at the start of the tax year. But when you're moving over to other payroll software, you'll still need to record that employment allowance claim, even if it was already submitted from your old software, so that the new software can take over, claim any remaining amounts, or it knows not to claim it if you have already claimed the full amount for that year. So I'm going to show you where to record that in the software and give you a bit of information on what happens at the end of the month when it comes to claiming that back. So back to the demo, I'm on the summary tab still, and you'll see under RTI, we've got the option to record our employment allowance claim for 21-22. So first thing to do is to confirm your industry sector. And if you're not in agriculture, fisheries, or road transport, you'll need to choose industrial. And then you'll need to make a submission to HMRC by providing your user ID and password. And at this point, you could, if you wish, store those credentials for future submissions, so your payroll submissions or EPS at the end of each month. So I'm just going to click submit, and this will just send the details saying that we are eligible to claim employment allowance. And that should complete shortly. And now that we have the green tick, it means at the end of each month, when we run our P32 report, it'll check to see if we've got any allowance carried forward. And if so, it'll then be able to claim that allowance by reducing our employer national insurance. But remember, in this case, if I go to my settings and employment allowance values, I have already used the £4,000. So this is just for record keeping, essentially. And we will do another claim at the start of the 22-23 tax year. So that's your employment allowance claim. That's the report I mentioned that you run at the end of the month, P32 report. We cover that report in our Processing Your Payroll webinar, and there is an employment allowance summary at the bottom of it, kind of telling you how much you've claimed this period or what you've claimed in the past, and anything that might be carried forward. The next bit of setup just to mention is the user management. So I said at the start of the webinar, if you needed any cover or you've got other payroll team members that need to access the payroll, you can add them now in Sage Business Cloud with their own email address. For payroll, it's pretty simple. You either give them full access to the payroll or no access as an additional user. So you might already have other users set up in accounting, and those users can be given access to payroll as well. So that is all set up from the settings area. The other user, if they haven't already, will need to create a Sage account with their email address. So they can do that at the point you add them. And then if you've given them access to payroll, they'll be able to view the payroll information. And then 3 other setup areas that you might want to explore before your first pay run. And again, we cover these in our Process Your Payroll webinar, is choosing a payslip template if you are emailing or printing your payslips. Alternatively, setting up online payslips. And there's a great video that takes you through that process linked to in our handout. And also you may want to set up payments and deductions in advance so that they are ready to assign to your employees when you do their first pay run. So that actually brings us to the end of what I'm going to cover in the demo today, but we now have some time for any questions that you might want to submit. So use the Q&A option on the right-hand side if you want to send any of those through. But if I could first mention some of the further support available. I have mentioned the other webinar that follows on from this, Process Your Payroll. That runs weekly. You can sign up for it from our website. The address is on that slide. Or if you are migrating from Sage Instant Payroll, maybe you're coming across the middle of this tax year, getting a bit of a head start. We do have a specific webinar around that as well. Please check out Sage University for some completely free interactive Sage Payroll training. Just go to sageu.com, you sign in with the same details that you would use for Business Cloud Payroll, and then you can access all of these courses as a direct link to the page you're seeing on screen on the slide. The Help Center I showed you at the start, so you can access it from the Help option or any of the question mark icons available in Sage Payroll. Either do a search or use the menus on the left-hand side. And if you do need to get in touch with the team here, scroll to the bottom of any support article to find the Get in Touch links. And then you can start an online chat. You can chat to a Sage ambassador, give the team a call, or you can drop us an email from there. So I am going to stick around for the next 5 minutes or so to give you the chance to submit any final questions. Also, if you'd like our handouts, now's a good time to download them. So that's available from the documents icon on the right. If you don't have questions and you're leaving the webinar now, thanks for joining me today. I hope you found the session useful. I do look forward to seeing you on our other webinars. Processing Payroll is probably the next recommended one. But if you're sticking around for questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to go on mute. We'll continue to provide those responses in the Q&A panel, and I will come back to say goodbye before we close the webinar. Okay, so thanks again for sending your questions through. We are now nearly out of time, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us at the webinar today. I do hope you found it useful, and do get yourself signed up to our other sessions if you haven't done so already. You will receive a follow-up email after this webinar with a link to the recording and also a survey to complete. So if you do have any feedback, please do spend a minute filling in that survey so that we can improve these sessions moving forward. So thanks once again, everybody, for joining us. We are going to call it a day, so stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you at some other webinars soon.